My name is Renee Paichaki. I'm a volunteer with Public Art Exchange, which, as all of you know, is a volunteer run and operated cohort of public art fans from across the country. And we're really excited today to host this session with some colleagues from the General Services Administration Fine Arts Program. We'll talk a little bit more about what PAX is later. But for now, I'm going to introduce George Berlin, my colleague on the programming committee, to introduce our speakers.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm on the programs committee for PAX. I'm also a public artist working in light and projection. And I'm going to tell you about these two awesome human beings here. So we have Dr. Nick Cardigan is a fine arts specialist with the U.S. General Services Administration. Did you know the federal government has one of the largest public art collections in the United States? Isn't that crazy? So Nick oversees this largest public art collection. His work focuses on the nation's capital, and he's particularly interested in making contemporary public sculpture accessible and engaging to a broad audience. He holds degrees from UC Berkeley and the University of Michigan, and his work has been supported by the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Mellon Foundation, and the Getty Research Institute. Joining Nick, we have Dr. Kelsey Gustin, who is also a fine arts specialist at the General Services Administration. She manages and interprets the U.S. Fine Arts Collection of New Deal and contemporary art in federal buildings across the Washington, D.C. region. Dr. Gustin earned her MA and PhD in the history of art and architecture from Boston University and her BA in history and art history at the University of Virginia. So many degrees today, right? She specializes in late 19th and earliest 20th century American art with a particular focus on the Ashcan School, Progressive Era Visual Culture, and New Deal Era programs. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick and Kelsey, who are going to be doing all the cool things today.
Before we turn it over to them, I meant to say one thing before, which is we are definitely leaving time for some Q&A at the end of the session. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat. I'll be mining those throughout the session and asking Nick and Kelsey at the end of their presentation. Sorry about that, George.
Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm a big fan of PAX, and we are eager to chat with you all. Thank you, George, for the kind introduction, and Renee for putting this together. Like you heard, I'm Nick Cardigan, and this is my colleague, Kelsey Gustin. We are fine arts specialists with the U.S. General Services Administration, or GSA. We both work in the National Capital Region, which is essentially the D.C. area, and we're both art historians by training, so you can expect a thrilling talk today, steeped in the rich history of American public art. We'll speak for about 40 minutes and then do some Q&A. And along the way, we'll share some anecdotes, favorite artworks, behind the scenes details, things like that. Our goal here is to explain what GSA is, what we do, why, and more generally help define our role in the public art ecosystem of this country. But we occupy an odd space and sort of function as a cross between a collecting institution, a local arts agency, and a federal steward of cultural heritage. I'm hoping to add some context and detail to our work, and also address some of its strengths and limitations. I've learned a lot from this community. It's been really invaluable, and I'm eager to define our place in it and answer any questions y'all may have. So today we'll move from the sort of 20,000-foot view down to the day-to-day. I'm focusing a little more on operations and the mechanics of our work because I'm assuming that will be of interest to this crowd. Along the way, we'll also talk about some objects we care for and our efforts to match best practices in the field, all doing so under federal law and acquisition requirements, which puts us in some weird places at times. Though if you want to know what we do, you first have to know what GSA is. This is the headquarters building on 1800 F Street here in DC. So the U.S. General Services Administration, or GSA, is an executive branch agency that makes possible the work of many other agencies. We help other parts of the executive and judicial branches do their work by offering expertise in things that fall outside of their mission. And for our purposes, that includes public art. Principally, we GSA are how the government buys the goods and services that it needs to function. Everything from pencils to fleets of vehicles to the massive IT needs of the government to building construction. Something like 1 out of every $7 the US government spends goes through GSA. So this all came about in 1949. The Eisenhower administration sees all these federal agencies doing the same work. So each is buying supplies independently, each is trying to figure out how to house their workforce. This makes no sense. It's very duplicative and wasteful. It's counterproductive to have a bunch of agencies competing with each other to do the same thing. So we created GSA as a way of centralizing all of those services and leveraging the scale of the federal government to buy goods and services for less money, more efficiently. The goal here was to streamline the work of the federal government after World War II to provide better services for the American public. So since 1949, our scope has grown to include a lot of other services, notably federal art collections. These are sort of just scattered examples from the collection, but we also do a panoply of other responsibilities. GSA is making a big push into AI, for example. We also do construction for other parts of the government, even if we don't care for that product in the long term. So, for example, the new-ish Eisenhower Memorial was constructed by GSA and then turned over to the Park Service. And this is because GSA has the expertise and contract vehicles to do this work, while many agencies do not. They're focused on whatever their primary mission is. A local and much smaller example is this is the Attorney General's fireplace. It's a historic fireplace, developed a crack. So they needed a sculpture conservator who knew how to repair old and delicate stonework, and were able to help with stuff like that. The point is that we're an essential part of the federal footprint nationwide, but we often operate in a supporting role. The bread and butter of what GSA does, though, is real estate. And I'm just putting this selection of images from a local project. This is the Mellon Auditorium. The big NATO summit was just held here. So we are the landlords of the federal government, which, by the way, makes us the largest landlord and tenant in the United States. Across the country, this includes thousands of federal buildings. The Public Building Service, federal buildings and US courthouses. The Public Building Service, which is essentially 1/2 of GSA, acquires space for federal agencies nationwide, and it owns or leases an inventory of 88,000 buildings, 370 million square feet, hosts 1.1 million federal workers. These are mind-boggling numbers. This humble art historian struggles to sort of comprehend these sometimes. Even in the Washington, D.C. area, which has the largest concentration of federal headquarters and workers, we own or lease something like 900 buildings, which is about 35% of all real estate in the city. So again, it's a big footprint, and it means we're correspondingly care for a huge amount of public art around the country connected to these federal buildings. So geographically, we work across all states and US territories. It ends up being a really neat window into what the federal government does for Americans. And I'd say it's been one of the real highlights of this position for me, is getting to know and see the scope and scale of what the US federal government does. Because we support other agencies, we get to know and see their work in a way that's not always on public view. There's art in a lot of federal buildings, and a good deal of it is artwork that we manage. Not all of it, but a good deal of it. GSA is considered a mid-sized federal agency. We have about 12,000 employees around the country. Depending on how you count it, we've got about 4 art historians. And we have a lot of other really talented fine arts folks that make up our program. I'll talk about our team in a moment. The federal government more broadly is the largest employer on the planet. One of the through lines for all of this work is scale, which I hope I'm conveying. I come back to this idea a lot that we, the GSA Fine Arts team, are a very small part of what GSA does around the country, but we play a very big role in both the history of public art and the current public art ecosystem in this country. I don't think we're particularly well understood on that last part, which is one of the reasons I'm so delighted to speak with you all today. So what does all this background on GSA have to do with the country's largest public art collection? Well, the Fine Arts program is part of GSA because the government sees it as one other federal asset to be managed. And more specifically, it's a public asset tied to buildings, and so it became part of GSA. More on this in a moment. Hey, speaking of art, that's why we're here. So what is the GSA Fine Arts Program? This is our mission and vision. Essentially, our mission is to manage this large federally owned public art collection at the highest ethical and stewardship standards. In practice, this means that we care and protect artwork. So we do a lot of conservation, preservation. My colleague Kelsey's going to detail some of this in a moment. We try to make these artworks accessible, understandable, relevant to the American public. And that public definitely includes the thousands of federal workers that see them every day. And we offer expertise to federal agencies about commissioning public art, caring for public art, more broadly, making these federal assets a meaningful part of civic spaces around the country. All told, there's about 40 people that make up the staff of the Fine Arts Program. We're spread across the country. GSA breaks up the country into 11 regions, and most of these regions cover hundreds of miles of territory, like half of the eastern seaboard, the Sun Belt, the Northwest, and Arctic. Kelsey and I and our team in the National Capital Region are a little bit of an outlier. We're sort of paradoxically, geographically, much, much smaller than the other regions. We cover just the DC area, and some of Maryland, some of Virginia, the District of Columbia. But we are numerically far and away the largest. We care for the largest concentration of artworks and the largest number of federal buildings. And again, that's because so many parts of the federal government are concentrated in the DC area. So GSA cares for the largest collection of public art in the United States, which is also one of the oldest. I'm pretty sure the oldest goes to the Philly program, the Association for Public Art, a remarkable program. Our collection's in all 50 states, Washington, D.C. It's in a number of U.S. territories as well. Taken together, we're about the size of a mid-sized American art museum. So if you were to collect all of our artworks from across the country and put them in one building, we'd be of a size with an institution like the High Museum, the Seattle Art Museum, or the Indianapolis Museum. We're smaller than major institutions like the Met, MoMA, Art Institute of Chicago, but quite a bit larger than places like Crystal Bridges or DIA or Norton Simon. I really like this thought experiment about putting all of the work together under one roof because it does a good job of positioning a public art collection that I think is very challenging to wrap your head around because it is so spread out. We're not a museum, clearly. But a lot of our goals and mandates are quite similar to a museum or a local art agency, and we're eager to learn from our peers in collecting institution and in public art teams how they've confronted similar challenges. Visibility is something I think about a lot. I don't think the general public makes much of a distinction about who owns a public artwork, but I still think it's important to not conflate a lack of visibility with a lack of responsibility. It's very much our mission to care for and help interpret these public artworks, even if most people, I'm going to guess, don't know they're looking at GSA art. And extending that museum metaphor a little longer, if you look at art museums by staff size, by collection size, then you're pretty quickly will realize our program might care for a collection that is comparable to the size and quality of a mid-sized American art museum, but we do so with a tiny fraction of the staff. Happy to talk more about that too in the Q&A. We have two major components to our collection. Artwork commissioned during the New Deal, and these again are just sort of random examples from across our collection. Two major components: artwork commissioned during the New Deal in the 1930s and 40s, and large-scale public art commissioned after 1974 as part of the Art and Architecture program. I'll talk about both of those in a moment. But I also wanted to add that there's a host of other objects that sort of fall in between those periods. For instance, the picture on the left of the screen here is a Trilon by Carl Paul Genuine outside of the E. Barrett Prettyman Courthouse in DC. It's a great example of that sort of commissioned in the 50s, not clearly one or the other. One of my favorite artworks is the oldest work in our collection. So it was made in 1856. It's also here in DC. If you've ever been to the Smithsonian American Art Museum, you may have seen a building across the street, locally known as Hotel Monaco. It's actually a federally owned building that the hotel leases from us. And it began its life in 1842 as the first US Postal and Patent Office. An Italian immigrant named Guido Buti executed a marble sculpture above the entrance. I think it's a pretty cool carving. It's called Fidelity, Electricity, and Steam. It's a little bat-winged figure over there on the right and an angel, and they're showing off modern technology for not so modern anymore. It's also a good example of the range of artworks we care for and their varied needs. This marble has been on the exterior of the building for 160 years. The marble is sugaring, meaning it's lost its hard, polished exterior and is slowly degrading. It's a real challenge to care for because there's nothing we can do except to try to slow that process down. We also have to be very careful about how we clean the sculpture. So I'm showing here a clay poultice that our conservator uses to draw out from the sort of pores of the marble, draw out the soiling and discoloration. More recently, we've been trying to figure out how birds keep evading our bird netting. We don't have a solution to that one yet. I'm thinking about camping out to watch them or maybe dressing like a bird. But somehow they're getting in there. We're not sure yet. And again, my colleague Kelsey is going to talk a little more in depth about some of our conservation work, which is a big part of what we do. So GSA owns all of the artwork created during the New Deal in the 1930s and 40s. This was a massive government spending, a period of massive government spending on the arts and in all parts of society as the US government tried to pull itself out of the Great Depression. This also coincided with a significant expansion of the nation and its government. Between World War I and World War II, the federal government doubled in size. It profoundly reshaped the landscape of the nation's capital and the presence of federal entities all around the country. And when the New Deal came along, it was sort of excellently placed to produce work over and over and over around the country. It led to a lot of art. There are 4 programs that commissioned art during the New Deal. Talk about that in the Q&A if you're interested. And we know together they were responsible for the largest influx of contemporary American art the country has ever seen. Something like 100,000 artworks were produced. But keep in mind that GSA is not created until 1949, and only then does it take over ownership of the New Deal art programs that had shuttered. Sunsetted, I think is the term we use. Further, GSA didn't attempt a real inventory of the New Deal artworks until decades later. In the intervening time, thousands of artworks were lost or destroyed. It's not a proud moment for federal art stewardship. We know artworks were stolen or just neglected. We've got records of paintings being used as insulation for hot water pipes and discarded. The Fine Arts program was created in part to deal with this New Deal collection. And we now have records of about 26,000 artworks. That number grows each year. GSA has an active reclamation program that scours auction houses, eBay, the internet, to find artworks that belong to the US government and assert ownership. The federal government has never sold a New Deal artwork, so we have a pretty clear line of ownership. The majority of these New Deal artworks are on long-term loan to museums around the country. So most art museums you've been to hold some GSA art. Note too that there is one big exception to New Deal ownership, and that is postal murals. All of the artworks created for U.S. postal offices are still owned by the Postal Service. And that also a significant body of work. I think it's like 33,000 objects. One of the things I've come to really appreciate about the New Deal collection is that it captures a snapshot of what Americans thought constituted good contemporary art in the 1930s. The government commissioned all sorts of styles, though they clearly leaned away from European avant-gardes. You're not going to see a lot of Cubism or Surrealism in the New Deal collection. We do see an awful lot of artists sort of gently experimenting with these modernist approaches to art making, but in a way that would be sort of acceptable to the commissioning bodies during the New Deal. We're fortunate to have a significant holding of public art from the 1930s during a time when the whole concept of public art was a much more rare thing. The other big part of our collection is the contemporary collection. This is personally my favorite part of the collection. This is a lot of the stuff I work on, what my background is on. These are all artworks made after 1974 via the Art and Architecture program. So the Art and Architecture program just celebrated 50 years. We have a rich history of commissions. We've been fortunate to commission artworks by a whole lot of major American contemporary artists over that time span. Like the New Deal collection, these commissions document major trends and interests in contemporary American art making over the decades. If there was a public art museum, I think it would look an awful lot like our collection. Just to give you a sense of some of the contemporary artists that are represented in the collection, I've got a few slides here. This is Maya Lynn's Flutter. We also have work by Tony Smith, Anna Hamilton, Sam Gilliam, a couple works by Michael Heiser, a wall drawing by Sol LeWitt. Nick Cave just completed a work for us in Detroit. We have a great Martin Puryear sculpture, Louise Nevelson, Leonardo Drew, Melvin Edwards, Barbara Chase Raboud, and Odile Donald Odita. Excuse me. I would guess that most people don't think of a collection like this when they think of government art or federal art, but it's the product of decades of smart commissions, and I think a real source of pride. Regrettably, these commissions are not all particularly well known, and that's one of the big things we're working on now. That's definitely a passion project for me. A good example of that is this Robert Irwin sculpture. This is maybe my favorite sculpture in the city. I think it's accurate to call it the largest Robert Irwin sculpture in existence. It's called 48 Shadow Planes. It was made in 1983 for the old post office in downtown DC. And it's a gigantic example of the California light and space movement. I think it does a fantastic job of capturing that style of American art making. It's at once subtle, but also huge. A fine example of a public artwork that activates a very large and challenging space and also reflects the ideas and concerns that animated some of America's best artists from the 1980s. And here's one of our team members capturing some video. One of the ways that we try to share information about these objects is, doing talks like this, but also producing videos and things. So we have a series on YouTube called Art for the People. I will share a link at the end of this talk if you're interested, that highlights some of these objects. All told, there's a little over 500 of these art and architecture commissions, and that number keeps growing every year. So we have something like 24 new commissions in the pipeline. Most of them are for land ports of entry, so border crossings. The big infrastructure act that was passed by the current administration led to a lot of new public art commissions. And these commissions are a big part of what our colleagues around the country work on. As many of you know, public art commissions require you to coordinate work between artists and studios, a phalanx of construction, architecture, city planning professionals. And in many cases, there are one or two people responsible for the creation, integration, and long-term care of those artworks at the federal level. And those people come from the GSA Fine Arts program. So how does this all work? How do we commission art? The Art and Architecture program started in 1974. It was part of the larger boom in American public art making during that time period. Like a lot of those early programs, we were created around a percent for art model that in this case reserves, and still does, reserve 1/2 of 1% of the capital construction costs for a project for public art. This does a few things. It ensures public art is baked into all new federal construction. It's not the case that we're advocating each time we build something, hey, we should include art in this. It's part of the process. It's a well-established part of the process. There are, by the way, very much exceptions. The federal government builds a lot of stuff. We don't put art in every shed that the federal building builds. This percent for art model also allows us to begin the commissioning process very early, which has huge advantages, like working with the project architect to accommodate the artworks. They're able to change their plans to accommodate artworks. And it makes sure that the agency that's going to be occupying that building is a part of the process and they're not surprised by an artwork in their building. And then it also, the percent for art style allows us, gives us stability and predictability to manage our federal assets at the highest standards. We're not the first to do a percent for art program, but we did play a major role in popularizing that form of public art production. And here on the screen, we're looking at Alexander Calder's Flamingo. That was the first artwork produced by the Art and Architecture program in Chicago. And you'll see a pretty lively crowd there gathered for the unveiling of that artwork and this program. It's been great to see that Percent for Art model replicated at the state and local level, and it's a two-way street. We really learn best practices and smart solution from the community, and we're lucky to be a part of it. What a thrilling slide. As the public art field has matured and developed, we've tried to mirror and establish best practices. However, we also have to do this while following the very detailed rules that dictate how the government buys everything from sewage pump ejectors to lighthouses to contemporary art. We follow the Federal Acquisition Regulations, or FAR, which, it might not surprise you, we're not made for commissioning art. We are essentially, when we work with an artist, we're essentially telling the government that we want to purchase a single object. We don't know what it will look like. We don't know what it will be made out of. We don't know how big it will be. We don't even know where it will be located. There's going to be no competitive bidding, and it's going to come from a single source or studio. I'll detail the way we do this in a moment. But first, I want to address the why. This is, it's on there. Yeah, Jacob Hashimoto working on an installation actually at our headquarters. So the why we do this, our programs developed over the years to maximize artistic freedom, along with the larger field of public art, with the idea that when we let artists create with as few prohibitions as possible, we end up with a better artwork for the American public. Artists all the time come up with solutions or materials we've not considered, thanks to the structure of this process. And we're really relying on the expertise of our artists to sort of give us a good result. And we try to set up a system that lets them do their work. That being said, we can be a very difficult patron. I should note that we have a rigorous conservation and commissioning review process that ensures quality, a good fit, and it makes sure that we're able to care for the artworks for the indefinite future. We have sort of regular design review benchmarks and conservation review to ensure the commission goes well. So it's not like we give an artist a bunch of money and say, we'll be back in 6 months. Let's see what you got. It's a pretty structured process, but it is meant to be open-ended. One of the ways we navigate these federal acquisition rules is with the National Artist Registry, which is open to any artist in the states who is a citizen or lawful permanent resident. So if an artist wants to get a GSA commission, they have to be on this registry. It's very simple to join, which is the point. I will share a link at the end of the talk here. We also go out and invite participants for commissions, as anyone is able to do. The registry is one of the ways we adhere to the government's rules for buying stuff. So we can't do things like issue an RFP or an RFQ, but we have comparable systems to request the same information. And that process gives us a rich base of artists to build a competitive commissioning process. So if you are an artist, we want to work with you. These are more details of the Doho cell work. If you're an artist, we would like to work with you. Our goal is to commission the best American artists for our country's prominent civic spaces. We need you to sign up for the National Artist Registry. We ask for some basic information, name and address. We ask for a resume, and we ask for work examples, up to 20 images over the past 10 years. Once you submit those things to the form, ta-da, you're on the registry for 10 years. You do have to renew every 10 years. You can also apply directly for art and architecture commissions individually. It's a little more complicated. They're posted on sam.gov and elsewhere, and you can set up notification alerts to let you know about these. The first step, by the way, of applying to those individually is signing up for the registry. So it's a good idea if you have any interest in a commission. Outreach about this process and the National Artist Registry is something we're always trying to improve. Some of our colleagues from our central office did a series of webinars with the National Endowment for the Arts, and we can definitely do more. Hey, that's what we're doing right now. For the actual commissioning, we convene a panel of experts made up of community representatives, national art peers, local art peers, representatives from federal client agencies, and GSA staff. That panel reviews artists from the National Artist Registry, makes a short list of artists, and then votes on whom to recommend to GSA for an art and architecture commission. Sometimes the commission amounts are enough to work with multiple artists, and that's something the panel decides too. Our selection panels are all different, but typically they're looking for artists who have experience with large, complex projects. These commissions often come with significant budgets and require the corresponding expertise to manage it. I'll just say that the only commission I've worked on recently was for the new headquarters of Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. It was a $1.8 million commission, so it's a pretty healthy amount, and a correspondingly very large facility where it's gonna be located. So you can get a sense of our recent commissions at art.gsa.gov. There's a little clip there that says recent installations, to get a sense of what has been commissioned recently, and I've got those on the screen as well. Again, though, I want to emphasize there's no official style or preferred form of public art. We've commissioned a wide variety of work. I would say that's kind of like one of the key points. We've done landscape artwork of all different sorts, photographs, sculptures in stone, metal, neon, fiber, plastic, glass. We have murals, frescoes, and easel paintings. We've done a sound installation. We have light-based artworks, and we're open to other ideas. The one thing we really can't commission are performance or temporary artwork. Despite the huge growth of that form of public art making over the last decade, we're legally obligated to care for our artworks for eternity, and we're not able to spend public money on something that won't be around for generations. Maybe this will change in the future, I don't know. But for the time being, I'm jealous of the incredible temporary public artworks that I see my colleagues producing around the country. It's a really exciting part of the public art field right now, and I wish we could join you all, but maybe one day. On the other hand, our artworks are usually big commissions, and while we can't compete with all the billionaire art collectors around the world, we can often offer artists the chance to create an artwork for a meaningful and significant public space, and we can vow to both never sell it and care for it indefinitely. And this has helped us work with some bigger name artists, even as we, the federal government, are not always easy as patrons and can't always pay the most money. On that note of caring for the artworks into eternity, here's my colleague Kelsey Gustin, who can speak to another major part of what we do, art conservation.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, so for my part of the presentation, I'm going to be looking at very specific projects that we've been doing in the National Capital Region, which is our smaller region in the DC area. I'll talk about two programs, our conservation program, as well as our cyclic maintenance program. And I should preface by saying that we are quite blessed as a federal agency to have a lot more resources when it comes to having a budget for conservation, that many public arts administrators struggle to have those resources to care for their collection, but we are very blessed in our program. So moving to the next slide, Nick is going to help us advance. What are some of the challenges that we face when caring and maintaining the collection? So the challenges we face are challenges that many other public art collections and programs face, which is that we have a diverse collection. In our case, it's spread across multiple buildings, different materials, different ages. As Nick mentioned, we have works from the New Deal, from the 19th century up to contemporary works. And it can be difficult sometimes as well to find conservators who can treat some of our artworks. So many of them are quite large. We have very large murals, and not every paintings conservator has the studio to be able to work on such large scale works, as well as what we have in terms of monumental sculptures. To kind of reach that scale, we have to bring in scissor lifts and other resources as well. I think if you go one back, yeah, that's perfect. Picking up to, of course, the other, the major aspect of having a public art collection is that it is a public art collection. It is more accessible to the public, which is a wonderful thing, but as a result, it allows for more opportunities for damage to occur when it's out in the elements, and when there's just more people around. As Nick mentioned, we are in a museum, so as a result, these are some unique challenges that we encounter. So we have two conservators that we work with in the National Capital Region, and as a result, we have two contracts. One with Olin Conservation. This is for paintings, and then for sculpture and architectural arts, we work with McKay Lodge. And our contracts are renewed every 5 years, at which point we recompete, and at that point we can potentially change conservators. But this is a great way in which we can retain conservators that we can rely on for at least 5 years, and many of our projects can take up to 1 to 2 years to complete. And when choosing our conservators, it's very important for us that we are able to bring in individuals with experience, who are backed by a professional organization such as the AIC. And this is something that is very important to us because if anything, they are up close and personal with our artworks, and any kind of treatment that they do can have long-lasting repercussions for the viability of the art. So moving on to the next slide. How do we determine our conservation priorities? This really begins with our biennial inspections. We do these every 2 years, and we go around to our collection in Washington, D.C. This is often during the summertime, which can be a very enjoyable experience. And this year is one of our biennial inspection years. So we have been going around to our collection. And by laying eyes on the collection, we see if there's been any recent damage. But on top of that, we can notice any trends or long-term issues that we can address with our conservators. So for example, this summer, I'm showing a work here from Ned Kahn, and it is in a fountain, a small basin here. And we have a number of works that incorporate fountains, and this has been a real challenge for us. For different building staff who maintain the fountains, they have to deal with algae growth and other vegetation. So the easiest way to get rid of algae is chlorine, which is incredibly corrosive to stainless steel. And we can ask the building staff not to use chlorine, but at the same time, we need to offer them a better solution. And we realized that we had a knowledge gap when it came to this particular situation. So for the next, we're going to commission a fountain study for FY25 with our conservator to determine best practices. With our biennial inspections, we figure out our priorities, and then we bring in our conservators to do an initial assessment in which they develop a treatment plan. And then they carry out that treatment plan. And again, this can take a few years for the process from beginning to end. Now moving on to the next slide, I wanted to show a few recent examples of our past conservation work. In this case, we have a number of frescoes, including this one by Ben Shawn. It's located at the Wilbur Cohen Federal Building in Washington, D.C. This is a New Deal artwork, and unfortunately, in 2011, with the earthquake that happened in our region, a number of our frescoes sustained damage. And moving to the next slide, we can see some of the cracks that developed there, but we weren't, at this point, we were trying to figure out what are new cracks, what are old cracks, and are they spreading at what rate? And as a result, our conservator produced a fresco mapping. So this allowed us to show substantial cracks or separation versus hairline cracks. And this was so useful to us that we did this for all of our frescoes, so we can track this over time. And ending with a wonderful before and after of the work that they did to address this issue. And this is an example of one of our more recent painting conservation projects. And the other project I wanted to highlight as well is one of our sculptures. So this is a Art Deco piece. It's quite large, of an eagle. It was completed by Louis Easlin, and it first debuted on the facade of the Whitney Museum of American Art in 1954. And for various reasons, it ended up in our collection, and it represents some of those artworks that fall between the New Deal and our art and architecture commissions. And this work had been out in the elements for a number of decades, and it showed. Our collection, our outdoor works have a hard life in DC, out in this urban area. But as a result, we decided that we needed to treat this work, and we brought in McKay Lodge. And the challenge of this work was its location. It was in a courtyard, which required us to bring in a crane to lift it out of the courtyard and onto a flatbed truck, which then was taken to McKay Lodge's Ohio facility, at which point it was taken down to the original bronze and coated in gold leaf and black acrylic to mimic the original Art Deco appearance. And a lot of research went into this project to accurately restore the work to its original appearance. Finally, when it was completed, we had to use a crane once again to lift it back into the courtyard. And now if you see this before and after, it really makes quite a difference in the space. It's quite brilliant, and it's held up very well over the last few years. And this is an example of one of our major conservation projects. They're not all like this. And this takes me to our cyclic maintenance program. And this is a pilot program we started a few years ago, realizing the importance of cyclic maintenance for preventing or putting off these major conservation interventions. It helps reduce overall costs, and with this kind of preventative measures and periodic monitoring of the collection, this would be crucial for the artworks over the long term. And we developed a care plan for each artwork with our conservators, and then we contracted the work with Eli Art Services. So this is a company that does art handling and shipping, but they bring a certain level of experience with art and care that allows them to accomplish these very basic maintenance. So for outdoor works, it's as simple as hosing down a sculpture, maybe with a mild detergent, and using microfiber cloths. And we found this to be very cost efficient to bring in their services for them to come out and do this every year with our works. For our cyclic maintenance, we do bring in the conservators. For instance, we bring in McKay Lodge to apply wax coatings to our bronze sculptures every 3 to 5 years, which also helps with their long-term care. Other examples of cyclic maintenance that we have in the program are our textiles. So we have a few of these, and Eli will come in to do annual vacuuming. So just like at home, they need to be vacuumed to remove all of the airborne particles that accumulate in these very thick fibers. And it helps to keep them in good condition, and it prevents these more invasive treatments. As you can see on the very far left image, just how dirty these textiles can become. And by doing this on a regular basis, we can kind of prevent or at least put off a larger conservation project. And just to conclude about our conservation and cyclic maintenance programs, this is something that's an ongoing project for us that we're continuing to try to improve. We feel very good about the state of our collection at the moment, but there's always room for improvement, and we're continuing to expand our cyclic maintenance program, which has been quite successful in our region. And for something completely different, I'll speak just a little bit about one of my favorite artworks in the New Deal as a part of our New Deal collection. Whereas Nick has a lot of his specialty in contemporary sculpture, I have a particular love for the New Deal. And this work is by an artist, Simeon Shimon, titled Contemporary Justice and the Child. It is located at the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C., on a 3rd floor stairwell. This was commissioned through the section of Fine Arts And this is one of 4 art programs, New Deal art programs, but unlike the other 3, this was not a relief program for artists. Instead, the section for fine arts held these open competitions to select the best American artists to create artworks for federal buildings and courthouses, much as we do today with our art and architecture program. Now, returning to the artwork, I should probably describe what it shows. So in the center, we see a mother figure holding the hands of her child who faces 2 possible paths in life. On the left side of the painting, we see child laborers staring out hopelessly under the shadow of this large factory. Nick, if you go to the next slide, I think we can show a little bit of a close-up of this. And then on the right side, this is a more positive view of children learning together in a classroom. It's much more peaceful. And the idea here for the artist was to show both the just and unjust treatment of young people in American society. The artist was a Russian immigrant. He was born Samuel Simpkins, but he changed his name to Simeon Shimon. He was involved in social justice issues in New York City, and for a time he worked for the National Child Labor Committee. So it's no wonder that he decided to highlight the horrors of child labor in his artwork. And why do I love this painting? The first reason, if you go to the next slide, the artist was very progressive for his time period, very forward-looking, and as a result, he includes both white and Black children in his painting. Here on the right, we see them learning together in a classroom, and this is definitely a time of segregation. And if in the upper right-hand corner of the painting is this wonderful scene of a foot race between a group of young men. And the winning runner is a young Black man. And I believe, though I haven't fully confirmed, that the inspiration for this is probably Jesse Owens, who won 4 gold medals at the track and field at the Summer Olympics in Berlin in 1936. So this was just a few years before the artwork was completed. And then lastly, the other thing I really love about this work is just how the artist is exploring exaggerated perspective. So he's distorting some of the proportions of the figures. There's also these 2 large hands at the bottom of the mural, one holding a drafting triangle and the other holding a compass. And you can tell that there's this influence of Mexican muralists in his work. But yes, this is an artwork I've returned to again and again since the first time I saw it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick to close out our presentation.
So as we wrap up, I wanted to again thank the PAX community for hosting us and making us welcome, particularly in the public art field. It's so important to foster a collaborative and supportive environment. Hopefully you've now got a better sense of what we do at GSA and where we might be able to help. We're always happy to talk shop. If you're ever in DC, then please come on one of our tours of the Federal Building. They're led by a really engaging, interesting tour host. It's me, I'm the person who leads the tours. We take pride in caring for this national treasure. We think it's amazing, and we're eager to share the artworks and program with others. Thanks for giving us a chance to do so, and thanks for listening. We are happy to answer any questions you all may have. And you are welcome to contact us.
Thanks so much, Nick and Kelsey. That was such a great talk. You know, it's always fun to see the work that we're doing locally kind of reflected on such a large scale. There are questions pouring into the chat, and I'm gonna just get into them right away. Asking for a friend, when is the internship in the GSA field office in Hawaii open for applications?
I wish I knew the answer. I do not. Kelsey, do you?
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, we'll see.
Is your public art registry open to colleagues? Like, can other folks from other public art programs use it as a resource?
Right now it's closed. We don't have a way, the federal government has really strict rules about how you share personal information. And so because we collect it, we would not be able to share it. We've been trying to, for instance, just use Eventbrite for about 8 months now. But because it involves collecting email addresses, we have this really rigorous and long privacy review. So I suspect no, but we're always happy to talk about artists who have received commissions. And every commission we've ever done is on our website, art.gsa.com.
Oh, that's really great to know. And Kelsey, you mentioned this incredible fountain study coming up. Will that be available for people to learn from as well?
I mean, I think there's definitely a means in which we can share the knowledge that we gather about best practices for maintaining fountains. So please feel welcome to reach out to us. Again, it might take a little while. It takes us a little while to put these studies together. But if we can share knowledge that improves the care and maintenance of artwork, and especially public artwork, we're game.
Yeah, okay. So back to the registry, a couple questions about it have come in. One, how do you encourage diverse artists to apply? And do you need to already be a big household name, like a blue chip artist, in order to have a chance? Or, do people who are maybe more mid-career without a national or international profile, do they have a chance?
Yeah, so we just did, over the past year, did a really big initiative to both spread the word about the National Artist Registry and also encourage a really diverse response. Ideally, we want the fine art collection to reflect the population of the country, right? So we have a diverse collection, but it could also be more diverse. We do not put any prohibitions on who can join the registry. So it's not as though you have to be at a certain level to join it. To be competitive for commissions, I think it's, you're evaluated by, as you are for many public art commissions, by a panel of experts. And so I think it definitely does help to have, some experience with that. I'm extemporanealizing here. I think it's a problem with the public art field that we have trouble getting artists into the public art pipeline. But as far as GSA is concerned, we put no restrictions on who can apply or what sort of level of career advancement you're at.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Okay. Coming in from Gina Amato, do you have storage for pieces in your collection, or is everything always on view? Do pieces ever get moved due to political motivations, new builds, or just for fun?
Kelsey, do you want to take this one or should I grab it?
Sure, I could start. You can kind of jump in as well. As I understand, our central office does have some storage. It is quite limited, which is largely the reason, especially with our New Deal art collection, that we loan out all of our works, our movable, especially our movable artworks from the New Deal, to institutions across the country. But I think, with our artworks that are in buildings, there's a number of challenges that can come up when it certainly with our courthouses, there can be changing tastes. I recently was doing a lot of research on our textiles and our contemporary fiber artworks. We found that we had a lot that were commissioned in the 1970s and 70s and early 80s, right? I believe, Nick. And then they dropped off, but some of them had to be removed for condition issues. Others, there was just a changing taste. There wasn't really an interest for textile arts into the 90s and the early aughts. So yes, do artworks, are they taken off view? Yes. And there's a variety of different reasons that might happen, and it's ones that we try to avoid. But is there other information, Nick, I'm kind of forgetting here?
Yeah, it's a very common question. It comes up a lot. We're part of the civil service, and every time a political administration changes, every single year we get questions about covering or removing artworks or getting new artworks. For the most part, our collection is permanent, right? It's in many cases physically affixed to the wall, or it weighs 20,000 pounds and there's no practical way to move it. There are some, like every museum right now, we're dealing with artworks in our collection that have outdated imagery, racist imagery, or related things. And like museums, we've sort of, figured out best ways of addressing that. It's an ongoing dialogue. I wonder if it will change in the next 5 years.
Meredith McKinley asks, how have changes to building security changed how you cite new work in the building? And how have those changes, interrupted or changed public access to the collection?
Man, that's a great question. I pose to Kelsey all the time, what's the point of a public art collection if the public can't see the art? And there's a couple ways to answer that. Yes, I think we do. I would say it is more common to have artwork, say, outside of a secure facility where it's easier to see. I've also very much embraced the idea that a significant part of the public are federal employees. So we have, for example, in the DC area, we manage a lot of very large federal campuses. They look like college campuses in size. So like the FDA, the CIA, some of these other bureaus have really big facilities. And in some cases, those are not open to the public, but there are something like 11,000 employees there every day. And so I count that as a slice of the public. We also try to offer tours and get people into our spaces, particularly here in DC. We have really rich holdings in the Federal Triangle. All those buildings were initially made to be open to the public. And then 9/11 happened and many of them closed their doors. So we do run tours where we get people in to see the artworks. We're currently doing tours of a big campus called St. Elizabeth's. But there are some places where it's never going to be practical to do public tours. So we try to figure out other ways of making them accessible through videos or through talking about them or publishing on them, things like that. Like the Department of Justice has an incredible art collection. It's hard for us to get into the Department of Justice. We're unlikely to be doing public tours.
Thanks for that explanation. Meredith Dvorsky, asks, how do you work with the local community to help guide their review and selection process?
Yeah, so it's tough because in DC we are able to do a lot more work with the local community because we have a much smaller area. Some of our colleagues, I see at least one on the call, Melina, has a much bigger multi-state, hundreds of mile area, and so working with the local community can be challenging in that context. But part of the selection process includes community representatives. So when we're going through and determining what artist to commission for an artwork, the community has a voice on that and has a sort of say in what might reflect the values or the sort of interests of the community. We also, though, are a national program. And so we don't give particular preference to local artists. With the argument that we want to draw from a national talent pool, and also, we don't want it to be we only commission a Cincinnati artist from Cincinnati and a Detroit artist from Detroit. I think we're a little different than some other arts agencies in that, but we aspire to have a national identity, and we pull from a national pool of artists.
Just one quick question came in from Adrian Gaither. Have you ever commissioned an artist collective or collaborative?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah. I'm gonna be something named Michael Kors. What's his name? We have worked with artist groups and partners and things like that as well, and we are happy to do so.
Great. One last question. I know we're supposed to end at 5 o'clock, but Jennifer Easton asks, just a light question, in light of the nationwide call to review memorials and monuments, has the GSA done a review and a revision of any of its artworks?
Oh, so we have a great answer to this, which is we don't do any monuments or memorials. We have a couple that are grandfathered in, but categorically, we part of our program is structured so that we are deliberately trying to produce public artworks and not memorials or monuments. Like I said, there are some exceptions, but we have worked on a review of artworks, certainly in the DC region and writ large. And like I said, we're responsible for most of the artworks from the New Deal, and some of those have ingrained cultural attitudes from the New Deal, and it's our responsibility to figure out what to do with them and how to talk about them and how to approach them.
Great answer. I wasn't expecting that. Maybe you talked about that in your talk, but I didn't pick up on it. Well, we're at 5 o'clock. Thanks everyone for coming today. We had 60 people attending at the height of attendance, and it's just so fun to see people from all over the country tuning in. If you don't already know about PAX, Public Art Exchange is a pretty awesome group of colleagues. It's people from all over the country who are really passionate about public art. And it is a network where we really encourage it's free. We really encourage member participation, right? So if you and your public art nerddom, if you want to have a talk about, continuing up on Jennifer's question about how do you review monuments and memorials in your collection, if you want to geek out about, public art selection processes, we welcome you to join us and to organize a free event, organize a shop talk. We really our purpose here is to increase communication within the field, appreciation of public art, and to offer chances like this for us to kind of get to know our colleagues from across the country. So I encourage you to join PAX and to be a part of it, because it's kind of people's engagement that's making it a fun place to connect. We'll share this recording on PAX channels, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you again soon.